Hello and welcome back. Thank you so much for choosing to stay with us here at TV47. Remember, you're watching the Dayscounter and you can interact with us on text message, that's 22047, or you can interact with us on social media platforms, that's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at TV47KE, or our website, that's www.tv47.co.ke. Now we're going to get into another exciting part of this segment, which is a discussion on matters around the business world that have been making headlines. But before we do that, today's topic is going to be a little bit different. And so we'll start off with a song that has currently been making headlines and has been played so many times in the last couple of weeks since it was launched, which is King Kaka's song, and I quote, Wajinga Nyinyi. So let's first listen to it and address a few issues and topics that were highlighted in that particular song.
I have been well, thank you.
Yes, happy festive season.
Asante.
And I have Alan Owino, my colleague from right here at TV47. How are you doing?
Good as usual.
Great. Let's start off with the song itself. What do you think about the song? Do you like it? I mean, you know, he's used art to actually communicate very powerful messages across. So what is your opinion generally of the song? Maybe I can start with Stephen.
It's interesting. He has expressed what many people feel is wrong with the country. And he has taken artistic liberty to express himself and to raise to the awareness or the consciousness of the people of Kenya some of the situations that go on, and sometimes people overlook them, or sometimes they have them at the back of their minds. They speak privately in their homes or in the bars and restaurants and meeting places. So what he's done is really bring all minds together with his song. He's expressing how he feels. He's expressing some of the frustrations that Kenyans feel. And so for that reason, he has caused there to be a discussion countrywide in terms of the direction we want our country to take and the issues that citizens don't feel are being taken care of.
Right, and it's very interesting that you've mentioned that he's speaking about the things that are already in our minds. But perhaps, Alan, you can even comment on this. Do you really think that releasing a song like this is going to make that much of a difference? I mean, we've had so many songs in the past. For example, Sauti Souls, Tujiangalie. You know, it's made the million mark in terms of viewership and listenership, and not much was done. We also had, a few years ago, we had the other song by Eric Wainaina, which is Inchi ya Kitu Kidogo. And really, there's not much that we've been able to see. Much as, yes, it is an expression generally of how Kenyans feel and the frustration. But at the end of the day, we'll still go back and do the same voting, and we'll still choose the same leaders, and we'll still have the same problems, or so they say. So what is your opinion on this?
First things first, I'd love to say that it was a beautiful piece of work by King Kaka, because we have so many issues that are affecting Kenyans at the moment, but he literally trickled it down to 6 minutes and made the whole communication in 6 minutes. Now, we've been seeing similar things in the past. We've seen songs coming out addressing issues like that, but I think it's a different time for us as a nation. It's a different time for us as a nation in the sense that if this would have happened a couple of years ago, it would have been something detrimental to himself. So first and foremost, we've grown democratically. He's able to express himself freely. And secondly, I feel like there could be change in the coming days, because the way I've been seeing young people, ladies in general, taking up their space in leadership, it's a really beautiful thing. And I think this is just part of the eventual course that is going to happen. So I think let's just give it some hope, and hopefully we're going to act on it as people and citizens ourselves. Yeah. Right.
It's interesting that you said a few years ago it would have been very detrimental to probably even his career. And even though we say that, we'll find that there are other ways that can be used in order to remedy the situation, so to speak, such as even taking down the song, as we've seen in the past. And so this question of freedom really is in question. But let's get into some of the topics that he addressed, which are really facing Kenyans. And one of the topics which was interesting was tenderpreneurship, you know, where he actually said buying a pen for 20 shillings when doing tenders for the government, you would pay even 8,000 shillings. And, you know, there's a huge gap for this. And we've seen loopholes in Waiguru's government, for example, whereby, you know, you've seen countless number of scandals in NYS and so on and so forth. So really, maybe you can just comment on this, especially when it comes to the opportunities in the tendering and tenderpreneurship sector, and how true this is, and really what would have been the solution if the case is as it is being described in the song.
Now, let me make sure I follow what you're asking. Are you asking about the case that he cites, or
So
some
the first
clarity
thing,
there?
so the first thing that we are talking of
Yeah.
is the tendering process.
Mm-hmm.
We're saying, or rather, he is saying, I take that back. He is actually saying that if you are applying for a tender, and it's, for example, this pen, and a pen, we all know it would cost something thereabouts in the neighborhood of 20 shillings, right? And doing the tender for example, the government, you would win that tender if you put a price or quoted a price like 8,000 shillings for a 20 shilling pen. And these are things that we've seen countless number of times. Just to mention one example of Waiguru's government, we've seen so many other cases whereby something that is costing a certain amount of money has been hiked. And remember, we are in the business space, and young people want to get in as tenderpreneurs, and actually pursue some of these tenders. Where is the gap really? Why is it that this is the case, and what is or where is the remedy when it comes to easing the process and making it as seamless as possible?
I think there are two things there. One, you're mentioning Waiguru's government, and the song is talking about the NYS scandal, which are two distinct things. Waiguru is currently governor of Kirinyaga, and when this happened, she was the CS for devolution,
The head, yeah.
and under which NYS fell. So he cites that there were pens bought at that price, at 8,000, when you can buy the same pen at 20 shillings. That case, if you recall, was pursued, and the DCI or the ESCC found that Anne Waiguru was not culpable, and that's what was announced. Now, the people who were involved in that matter, and which rings in the minds of Kenyans, there was a lady by the name of Kavura who claimed that she carried money in sacks, and we've not seen or known of her prosecution. We know she was arraigned in court at one time. We don't know what happened with that matter. I think that's what he's raising the question on what happened. And of course, Waiguru is the poster child for that scandal, while the ESCC, DCI says they found nothing. She wasn't culpable in that matter. So it is those things that are still pending, that are left unaddressed, whether by government institutions, that cause people to see things a certain way. But I just wanted to make the distinction between her current position and what the artist is citing.
And so now that we say that these things that are unaddressed and they are causing such turmoil in this artistic world, maybe you can actually comment on what it is then. Definitely his idea behind it was to talk about how there's such a gap between what it is that you go out there to reach out for a tender, and this is the amount of money that you will get out of it, when in reality there is that discrepancy or that big gap. So what is it you think then is the problem? And also when it comes to finding the solution, especially for young people, they do want to get into this particular space, but now they're held back because they can see time and time again, not just these other instances of where there is money that's being lost, and there is no accountability, and there is no one that's actually taking charge of it. Maybe you can comment on that.
Well, the first thing, there are two things that I'd love to comment on the tenderpreneurship space, is that when you look at lucrative tenders, so to say, for lack of a better word, the lucrative tenders, they come from the government. And one thing that people who are going into the tender business don't necessarily understand, like young people would love to engage themselves with the tender space, is that when you're doing business with the government, the first thing that you need to equip yourself with is starting capital. They don't give you a down payment. You're not given a down payment as a tender, like go and do this. No, it usually doesn't happen like that. So the first thing that I'm always trying to advise people is, why don't you do some little research on this tender business? Just do a little research on it, on this tender space, first and foremost, because you seriously need some serious starting capital. But to go back on Waiguru is the one that King Kaka was talking about, dealing with all the tenders and stuff like that. I think his main thing that he was trying to address there is that we've seen this person handling a certain docket, and she's been accused, and she was the head of that docket. So apparently she was excused, like she was exalted of the whole thing, like she wasn't guilty. But as a head of an institution or a head of a team, there's no way you can claim not to know that certain discrepancies are going down in this space, right? So what King Kaka was trying to put outside there in terms, and it's really, really hurting our business space as a nation, is that we are literally exchanging these leaders who've been accused and have had some certain discrepancies in whatever dockets they're handling, and you're continuing putting them in spaces that are affecting the people. That's what I think he was trying to highlight.
Right. Are you in agreement? I see you.
I think that's what he was saying. The only thing I don't agree with is that one, if you're not convicted, if you're truly found not having been involved in the scandal, and the institutions that are supposed to do those investigations come out and say that you are not involved, then there needs to be a conclusion so that people know that the right people who are involved were actually arrested, charged, and convicted of the crime. I think that's important.
Right.
Now, in terms of, we know that there's been many scandals related to government tenders and also provision or non-provision of services that are paid for. And that is something that needs to be corrected, because Kenyans are working hard, they're paying taxes, and then they learn that an individual has taken millions out of what they've paid in, and they got nothing in return. So that needs to be addressed urgently. But in terms of, now, in terms of office, for example, in the case of Waiguru, she left her CS position as a result of that scandal. And then she got re-elected by the people of Kirinyaga, rather not re-elected, but actually elected for the first time by the people of Kirinyaga into office. So I think there's a problem when we muddle the two. But as I said earlier, I think the problem is because there is no conclusion to that matter, or it takes so long that people assume this person was found guilty, was let go, and nothing happened. And I think that's the question that he's raising.
All right, fantastic. Now, something very interesting that he also continues to speak about, King Kaka, in his song, and he talks about betting being an actual opportunity that youth can pursue as opposed to getting jobs. And he argues that older people will get these opportunities as in comparison to young people, such as we've recently seen Udiawari being appointed. And so this is an issue that he's raised, and he believes that young people are struggling with this, and this is why you find a lot of young people are the ones who are taking part in betting and betting activities and firms. So really, what is your take on that, and what do you think really can be done? Because indeed, much as we've seen that betting firms have been put halt on and so on and so forth, still young people are lacking these jobs and complain every other day that there are no opportunities and so on and so forth. Where is the problem?
I think and we had this discussion in a different meeting before with Alan and so on. And I think of course, betting came in and it took a hold of a lot of youth in terms of their participation in placing the bets and so on. But it also created employment in certain areas, such as supplies for advertising, food for events, kits for sports, etc., etc. But the idea that betting is a way out, in my view, is a misconception. Because from the perspective of the businessman, owning a betting company is a very lucrative business. Because and now with technology, you get anyone, anywhere to bet through your platform. And so you can capture a lot of people without the issues of logistics, etc., etc., etc. And it's always geared toward the house winning, the house being the owners of the business winning. So for every million shillings that's won, there is hundreds of thousands of people that did not win. Granted, that's the idea, and everyone understands that you're placing a bet. But I think it's unfortunate when our youth think that that's the way to go, because it's really not rigged to help you. Yes, you'll find one or two people here and there winning, and they win huge amounts, and you figure, I'm going to try, but that's the bait. So in that respect, I think we need to find another way to help our youth plan their futures or opportunities. But in the absence of opportunities, I think someone feels that they can, place their bet and have a chance of winning. Now, the problem is when you don't have money and you want to place that bet, what do? Do you go and steal? Do you go and cheat? Do you go and work for it? And then when you're expecting easy money, then that means you're not going to go show up at work and spend time trying that, because I'm going to win that 100 million soon. You know, so that's
And what about the idea that he continues to say that the youth are claiming that these opportunities are a reserve of the older people and the older generation, and that really they don't have any opportunities because even those that are available are being given to people who should probably not deserve them, according to what he says in his song?
I can see what he's saying and why people feel that way. I know when the president appointed Mudi Awori, the youth or a lot of bloggers were up in arms saying, wait a minute, this guy has served his time, he's old, and so on. I'm not for age discrimination, but at the same time, I think there's been enough of those examples of people who are perceived old by a very young nation getting opportunities. Sometimes it's experience, sometimes it's trust. I think the president came out and said, you know, when I put youth, they go and steal. Of course, that's a generalization, but he was trying to justify or speak back to what people were complaining about. So I'm not sure how that exercise of appointing people is done, but clearly age is never a consideration when it comes to those, you know, appointments.
Yeah, Alan, what is your take on this?
So maybe if I start by the issue that you've addressed in terms of the CS positions and basically these big major positions in the government being given out to the elderly people. The first thing I'd say is that I don't necessarily agree with so many young people out here. I've always told people that those big positions and the CS positions, they're basically on administrative levels. Mudi Awori being there doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to do that much. It's just like an oversight. He's just going to delegate certain issues. He's like the face of that thing, so to say. So I'd urge young people, let's forget about these old people being given these spaces and try and focus with these ministries and whatever is down here, what is actually happening. They're just on that minute. They put in their time because ideally when you're speaking, this Mudi Awori is going to be you in a couple of years. So what are you going to tell the people when you're there? Right. You'll be that CS and people will be saying, oh, you're old. But in the back of your mind, you know very well that you have the experience. It's basically on experience and guidance and leadership. So on that part, I don't necessarily agree with King Kaka, so to say, with the bigger majority on terms of employing people and that. But coming on to what is claiming, I don't want to say it's a claim, but what is saying on the track that young people have actually said that betting has given them a working opportunity more than the government has actually looked into it. I don't know, I've talked about this a lot of time. It's just, it's a day-to-day survival, so to say. The economy is so harsh, especially on young people who are exiting campus. It's so harsh for people right now that you need something to just get you by. I don't want to be here and be quoted as somebody who advised on it, but I always tell young people, I mean, if it's something that works for you, it's just an investment, just like somebody's investing in real estate.
How is betting an investment?
Exactly.
For me, I tend to disagree.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. I don't want to be quoted as somebody who's advocating for it, but at the same time, I don't want to be quoted as somebody who's also against it, because I'm just it's something that I've left for people to decide, because it's a real-time investment, so to say, because you put in this, you expect this, you put in this, you fail. It's vis-a-vis somebody who does it in real estate or something to say. So I'd say to the young people, if you're able to and you've gotten the grip of it, I mean,
and I think the underlying
yourself. And I think
the underlying, as you speak, I'm thinking about this. I think the underlying message is that people feel that betting companies are closer to them than the government, which is truly an unfortunate situation. I think that's what the artist is expressing.
Trying to convey.
But if you recall, even when this issue with the betting companies came up, government was saying, you guys are taking all this money out, and also it's responsible because you're causing addiction in our youth, etc. So now, and you know, the artist expresses himself in many different ways, and one of them is to cause you to wonder, what is he saying? And what he's saying is that these youth feel closer to these quote-unquote vultures than they do the government, which is, you know, this is the government of the people. So they should feel closer to their government, but they feel closer to
Right. But all in all, Alan, you're advising people not to bet, right?
No comments on that.
Do your best, Alan.
Yeah, I'll reserve my comments on that. But yeah, whatever rocks your boat, I think
Right.
go with it. Yeah.
Right, and so moving on, the artist also continues to talk about the oil project, the Tala oil project that's in Turkana, so the oil exploration that's currently going on, and how it's so ironic or satirical that we have oil in just our own country, and it has to be exported, to be refined and added more value, and then now sold back to us. And this has been true for so many other products, and not just this particular one that the artist has mentioned in his song. And so really the question lies there in where is the opportunity, and why is it that there is always going to be that gap with the manpower or the necessary skills that are required to do that refining right here at home that we lack, or so to say we lack, or is believed that is not available. So where really is the gap that stops us from doing, or stops the Kenyans from doing it themselves, according to what he's trying to express in the song? Maybe I can hear from you, Alan.
With regards to the
Yeah.
Tala, let me start with saying, in terms of leadership, because everything just revolves around leadership. One thing I'd also love to advise the electorate, the people who go to cast their votes, is that whenever you're going to, whenever you're going to elect in somebody, please be very keen on electing visionary leaders. If you have a leader who's not a visionary person, that's where the problem starts coming in. Now, when you have somebody who's not a visionary leader, this was something that probably somebody foresaw back then, but the infrastructures weren't laid in place to make this a possibility. That's why we have to take the oil outside for processing and all that kind of stuff and bring it back in. Now, moving on to my next point is that most of the projects that are being brought up, an example is the UHC program. You have Natala Oil. Most of the projects that are being brought up in the country with regards to helping the people are very good and amazing projects. The big problem is that we move into projects without setting the basis and the good foundation for them. We don't have the right infrastructure to facilitate that oil program. So that's why it has to go all through that process. But just to finish on that point, I think there's a lot going into it. Even the Tala oil, the oil that is found in Turkana County, it's, if I read well, it's Brent crude. Yeah, it's Brent crude. So it's kind of like, it's the market, it fetches better market internationally. So that's why I think that there's so many things that plays into it in the Tala oil. It's not necessarily us taking it outside, but it revolves around infrastructure and the right foundation to actually handle certain industries. That's my take on it.
Right, I'd like to hear your take on this.
Yeah, going back to the artist, there's artistic liberty or freedom to express oneself and send a message as the artist would like to. The other is also information, because artists are the ones who speak to a society's or community's views. That is how people read it, or people can be guided to read it that way. When it comes to the oil, Kenya is a new exporter of oil, and we are not extracting enough oil to justify putting up a refinery. Now, there was a refinery in Mombasa many years ago that was closed down for many issues, capacity. The demand for refined products was higher than the refinery could do. It was old, it needed to be replaced, and so on. But reality is that it's cheaper to actually import refined oil than to put up a refinery. The other thing is also capacity. How much oil are we extracting to justify? I think it goes from 400 to 500,000 barrels a day are required to really justify or offset the cost of operations. So it's cheaper to export it and bring back refined. And again, it's not the same oil that's coming back necessarily. So you're exporting, it goes to someone who buys crude, they do the refining, and they export to various other markets. So I think that's the reason why, that is actually the reason why we are exporting the crude and still importing.
But just to probably ask Steve this question, is that it's cheaper, yes. It's the same thing that happens when it comes to electricity. The same electricity that we buy from Uganda and supply to the Western Kenyan bit of it, right? It is cheap, but is it not a shortcut? Is it not a short-term solution for it? Is it not too expensive in the long term, so to say?
No, it's not, because you see, one of the challenges we have is that we see developed markets already doing things, and we think, why can't we do it? And that's the right way of thinking. Yeah. But with everything, it takes time for it to get to a point where it makes sense to have our own refinery. Of course, it would be cheaper if we had our own refinery and we had enough crude oil to consume our own oil first before it goes out there. But the forces, the market forces, and economies of scale. There's someone who has an enormous refinery, the size of Parklands, for example, that can put out more oil or more refined product per unit at a lower cost than we can ever do as Kenya. So one has to make that decision, which is better in the long run, even for the country. So those things come into competition. So again, time will tell whether we'll actually be a refining country or just a crude exporter.
Right, right. Unfortunately, my director is telling me that our time is up, and that's all the time I actually had with you for today. But I'm sure that conversation was very insightful, considering that this is a very hot topic and discussion amongst many people, and especially around the youth. And the takeaway really is to listen to the music, of course, but critically, and really try to understand what is being conveyed behind the surface meaning. I've been your host, Lucy Riley, and until tomorrow, goodbye.